Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, The Joyful Learner. I'm Donna and I'm a certified Montessori educator. It's back to school time, so I thought it'd be a wonderful time to share a little bit about how I set up my Montessori classroom, as well as some of the things I do on that first day of school, as well as during the first month of school. So let's get to it. So let's talk a little bit about the main things that I have done to prepare for the first day of school, as well as the first month of school. At the end of the video, I'll tell you how to access a free checklist that you can use as a starting place for your plans. As you may know, there are several main areas of a Montessori primary classroom. And I'll be talking more about these areas in other videos as I work through the lessons of the curriculum. But the main areas are practical life, sensorial, language, math, science, which includes biology, geography, and history, art, and movement. So in the lessons that I present in my videos, I will be touching on most of these areas, or all of these areas probably at some point, but I will be focusing mainly on math, language, and science, at least initially. Organizing and storing Montessori materials can get challenging, and you may have already encountered this if you are a Montessori educator or if you are homeschooling using the Montessori curriculum. And if you're like me, you enjoy collecting and making your own materials, so organizing and storing is something to talk about for sure. Basically, I have a binder for each area of the classroom, so the areas that we just talked about. And the binders that I created, I actually made during my training, my Montessori teacher training. I also have a binder for each month, which contains the seasonal printables that I might have or that I have collected over the years. And then finally, I have a box for each month of the year, the school year. And this is where I store my seasonal materials. So I might have a lot of things to do with apples for September. Springtime, it might be more butterflies and flowers and things like that, that I will put out for practical life to change things out and keep children interested in the practical life area. Also, then of course they flow into science, and sometimes I'll even have math materials that are seasonal, such as little tiny apples that they can count for math, that sort of thing. So I have a box for each month. So in the videos that I present in the future, at the start of the month, I plan on kind of unboxing my monthly box and sharing some of the things that I actually have in the box, and then showing how they can be set up on the shelf. Montessori shelves get set up from left to right, top to bottom. So from left to right and top to bottom, you want it to be the easiest to the hardest. So the child knows that the top shelf is the easiest, as well as the left side of the top shelf is the very, very easiest. And so you can sequence the materials, and the child knows as they progress to the right and further down on the shelf, the materials will get harder, and they do tend to know which ones they're ready for and which ones they're not. This is a picture of the math shelf that I have in my home that I use for tutoring, and you can see the top shelf is pretty nicely spaced there, and it does progress from easiest to hardest. So we have the red and blue rods that we use for counting, and then the short bead stair, as well as then on the far right side of the top shelf is the cards and counters material. So that does get progressively harder, and I'll explain why later on when I actually present those materials. And then on the next shelf down, I actually have the teens on the far left side of the second shelf, then the tens, then the 100 board, as well as the introduction to the decimal system. And then the far right actually is a printable version of the golden bead material. So that does get progressively harder. I would say that that second shelf is probably too crowded, but because I have limited space in my home, I do have it set up that way. But if you do have more space, definitely try to space out your materials to a greater degree if possible. And you may wonder, how does that one little box on the second shelf have the teens board included in it? I do have a printable version of the teens board and the tens board, as well as the 100 board, and then the golden bead material that I'm going to show you the material, as well as show you how to access that. It's in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. If you're interested, you could go there and download the material and use it along with the presentation that I provide later on. Now we're going to talk about a few other things to set up at the beginning of the school year, either for your home classroom or your school classroom. And one of them is having a place for finished work. So in the classroom, I would have a hanging file folder box that each child would have a tab with their name on it. And then they would put their finished work in there. They could also put their work in progress in there if they wanted to do that, but they would have to go and retrieve it when they're ready to work on that. Sometimes also I would allow them to leave their work out, say at the end of the day or at the end of the morning work cycle, and if they're going to work on it in the afternoon, they could leave it out on the table, but they'd need to put their name on it, and that's where the name cards come into play. I would print those out at the beginning of the year and laminate them. It gave the child also a chance to trace over their name on the name card, because if it's laminated, they could use a dry erase marker and trace their name and then erase it off. But they would use the name card to mark their work in progress. So if they have a work rug out and they wanted to leave their work out, they would need to put their name card on it. Same with any work that they left on the table. So next we'll talk about setting up your planning and assessment forms for your class. I would have cards for each of the students that I would use to track the letter sounds that they know, as well as their numeral recognition and their counting abilities. And I also have a more extensive assessment form that I would use to track other math and language concepts and skills. I do have this created in my Teachers Pay Teacher store for purchase and download. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the description box. This was a form that I created, and I would share this with the parents. And the parents actually really liked it because they had very specific information about what their student knew how to do and what they could work on at home as well. In this packet, I also have some planning documents that you could utilize. So I have a weekly planning document where I would plan out my small groups with each of the students. I would also plan out any large group lessons I would do. I've got an individual work plan in there for the young child to plan out their work day. Also, at the beginning of the year, I would assess each student to plan so that I could plan for their individual lessons as well as any small group lessons. So, of course, in a Montessori environment, it's mainly individual or small group lessons. So you'll want to know where every student is in terms of their skills and abilities so that you can group them together into smaller groups, and that makes it a much more efficient process to provide lessons. Especially if you're in a school environment, you may have one or more bulletin boards inside your classroom, as well as possibly in the hall outside your classroom. And here's the Montessori and Eric Carle inspired bulletin board that I like to put up in the hallway. It also included the snack schedule and monthly calendar that I would put out there. But it is, like I said, Montessori inspired because Maria Montessori said the child is both a hope and a promise for mankind. And the illustration I have on there is Eric Carle inspired. Even though Eric Carle used tissue paper, I would have the children in the springtime paint paper and kind of mix in some of the colors, as you can see there. They'd paint large pieces of paper, and then later on, after it dries, we would cut out different shapes, and then they would create artwork with those different shapes. So anything that was left over from the previous spring, I would use that for this bulletin board in the fall at the beginning of the school year and put that up, and the parents really liked it. I just wanted to share that idea with you in case you were inspired to recreate a version of your own. So in a Montessori classroom, the child is free to move about the classroom. There are no assigned desks, as you're probably aware. The child has two main workspaces, the work rug as well as some table space. So they can choose where to do their work, and some work is more applicable to working on the floor using a rug, and then other is more applicable to using at the table. The work rug is very common in a Montessori classroom. On the top left of this slide, you can see my son rolling the rug. So either he's unrolling or rolling the rug. So you'll of course want to do a demonstration on how to retrieve the work rug, unroll the rug, do the work, and roll it back up again. Also in the middle, you can see the two children there, who are also my children, of course, walking around the work rug. So, of course, demonstrating to the children how to walk around the work rugs, not only their own work rug, but other children's work rug, because we want to respect other children's work. On the previous slide, I alluded to the work cycle, but I want to talk about it in more detail here. First, they need to identify a free workspace, either on the floor, if they're going to do a floor work, or at the table. There needs to be space for them to do their work. And then if they're going to do a work on the floor, they need to go get a work rug and unroll it in their workspace. If they're going to work at the table, then they need to just make sure that there's space for their table work. And then they go retrieve the material, which we call a work in a Montessori classroom. They retrieve it from the shelf. They do the work, and then when they're finished, they put the work away. And I always use the term ready and beautiful for the next friend. And I'll show them what that means in terms of putting their work away. So they put the work back on the shelf in the exact same spot and in the exact same way they found it. And then if they're going to do another work on the rug, they can leave their work rug there. Or if they're all done working on the floor, they'll roll their rug up and put it away. If it's a table work, they'll put the work away and make sure that their table space has been cleaned up. This requires a demonstration on how to do at the beginning of the school year, so just keep that in mind. Those new students really need to understand the entire work cycle so that they know that they need to put their own work away, etc. I have a little list here of some first week lessons that most of them are considered practical life lessons, care of the person or care of the environment lessons. And these are really important things to cover at the beginning of the school year. And it gets your classroom running smoothly right from the start. As I mentioned, the work rugs, how to unroll and roll the rug, how to walk around the rugs, and I'll demonstrate all of these things for the child either individually or in small groups, and sometimes I even do it in a large group setting. We'll put rugs out and we'll practice walking around the rugs very carefully and slowly. The demonstration really helps so students really understand what we're talking about. And then of course we'll talk about these other classroom procedures like how to wash your hands, the bathroom procedures, how to stand in line, how to walk in the classroom. Really demonstrating how to walk slowly and quietly in the classroom is very important. And then of course a lot of the work is on the shelf on a tray. So how to carry a tray without things spilling off of the tray. I always encourage students to push in their chair when they stand up. And then of course putting their work away, wiping up spills, making that workspace ready for the next friend to come over and do a work there. And then of course it's important to talk about broken glass, because in a Montessori environment there are lots of natural materials, wood and glass, and often, sometimes broken glass happens. Things get broken and it's not a big deal, but we need to talk to the students on how to move away from the broken glass. You don't want them picking up any broken glass themselves. They need to be instructed to move away and let the teacher come and sweep up the broken glass. And then, of course, resolving conflict with other children using the peace rose. And I'm going to do a whole video on the peace rose. And there's a book I'll be talking to you about in a few minutes about the peace rose. So I have a whole list of lessons that I cover during the first few weeks of school, and it's in a checklist. And I'm going to, at the end of the video, I will tell you how to access that free checklist. And now we'll talk a little bit more broadly about the first month of school. I do put a calendar together for every single month, and I share this with the parents at the beginning of the month. It gives them an idea of what we're covering on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And then also the cultural and science lessons that we'll talk about during that first month. So we'll do a little bit of a history lesson on who was Maria Montessori, and there are a couple books that I'll talk to you about in a minute about Maria Montessori, or at least a Montessori classroom. And then we'll get started on some of the biology lessons of living and non-living, and then our first geography lesson of land, air, and water. I wanted to just point out some of the books that I typically read at the beginning of the school year to help introduce the Montessori environment to the child, why it's set up the way it is. Our Peaceful Classroom, The Peace Rose, and the book about Maria Montessori are all geared towards children, and they're excellent books to read at the beginning of the school year so that they can understand their Montessori environment. I also have a YouTube video about who Maria Montessori is, so you could definitely share that with the children as well, and I will put a link to that video here as well. You can access it at this link, and hopefully you'll find that helpful as well. And here's a few more kind of back to school books that you can pick up if you're interested in those. I will put links to those in the description box. So I've been referencing throughout the video this free packet that I have in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. So it includes a first day script that I used when I was a new teacher. It helped me feel a little bit more prepared for that very first day of school. Of course, I did not follow it exactly, but it did make me feel more organized and ready for the first day. I have that checklist of the first week of school lessons that you can modify as well and add to it as needed. And then I have a calendar template with those ideas that you can insert for each day wherever it's appropriate for your schedule. And again, if you're a teacher in a classroom setting, you can share that with the parents to give them an idea of what's coming up each week. And then finally, I have 4 weekly newsletters with some of the content already started. It aligned with what I was doing each week, but of course, feel free to modify to meet your needs. So this packet is free for you to download. I'll put a link to the Teachers Pay Teachers store place where you can access this packet and download it. And I hope that you find it helpful. Well, I hope you found that helpful. And if you did, remember to hit like and subscribe. I'm going to now start going through the Montessori 3 to 6 curriculum. That's the primary curriculum for the 3 to 6 year old child. I'll have some links to my store, my Teachers Pay Teachers store, where you can download the materials that I'll be using. And I have created many Montessori aligned printable materials that follow that Montessori 3 to 6 curriculum. So you can follow right along. So please remember to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.